About a week ago, 17-year-old American Iva Jovic won her first WTA Tour title in Guadalajara, Mexico. Guadalajara is a 500-level tournament, meaning Jovic earned 500 points, shooting her up 37 spots in the rankings from 73 to a career-high 36 in the world. Now, quick disclaimer, I'm not taking anything away from Jovic's win. She's clearly very talented and will win many more tour titles. But still, the highest-ranked woman Jovic defeated en route to the title was 69th in the world, which is not a good look for a WTA 500, which is supposed to hold the standard of being a pretty high-level tournament. I mean, you could tell me this was a run to a WTA 125 title and I would fully believe you. There were a few top 30 players in the field this year in Guadalajara, like Elisa Mertens and Jelena Ostapenko, but there wasn't a single top 20 player entered in this tournament, which could be indicative of a true scheduling issue in women's tennis. Hello, my name is Christian Bassnight, and welcome to Christian's Court, where I cover tennis from all angles. If you have not yet already, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell so you are notified whenever I post more content like this. So in this video, I'm going to have a particular focus on WTA 500 tournaments because this overarching calendar issue I'm describing all boils down pretty much to the 500 tournaments. I'll start by briefly explaining the different tiers of tennis tournaments on the women's tour. The numbers preceding the WTA indicates how many ranking points are distributed to the champions. So WTA 125s, they're really not technically considered tour level tournaments, more the equivalent of an ATP Challenger tournament. Then you have the WTA 250 tournaments, which are the lowest level tier tournaments. They're more lower level competitors entered in these type of tournaments. Then you have the WTA 500 tournaments, which is like medium hard difficulty. It's supposed to have a good mix of the top players. Then you have the WTA 1000 tournaments, which are one ring below the slams. Very hard, prestigious tournaments to win. There are 10 of these, and basically all the top players compete in these tournaments. Then of course, as I mentioned, you have the slams, which is like the peak in tennis. Now in July 2023, the WTA announced rule changes which basically weakened the star power of their 250s while bolstering that of the 500s. Before this change went into effect at the start of the 2024 season, top 10 players could only compete in 2 WTA 250 tournaments each year, and only one top 10 player was allowed to compete per 250 tournament. Now with these changes, players ranked inside the top 30 cannot compete in a 250 tournament if there's also a 500 event held in that same week. There are a few exceptions to this rule though. A top 30 player could still go ahead and compete if they're the defending champion of said 250, and they can also compete if they are from the country of where that 250 event is held, and 2 if they are ranked between 11 and 30. Now, a top 30 player is only granted 2 of these exemptions per year. Now, in the weeks where there's only one 250, just one top 10 player can play. Now, that caveat was brought up earlier this year when Madison Keys was barred from competing in the Austin 250 after her Australian Open victory. When Keys committed to play in this Austin tournament, she was ranked outside the top 20, but her Melbourne win brought her to world number 7. Jessica Pegula, who was ranked 6th at the time, also entered this tournament, which forced Keys out of the Austin event. Pegula went on to win the title. The ATP Tour, by the way, has none of these restrictions on top 10 players competing in 250s. They pretty much allow the guys to do whatever they want over there for 250 tournaments. I asked top 20 women's player Daria Kasatkina about this a few years ago when the rule change was first announced, and she said the change could hurt many 250 tournaments.
I know it will kill the tournaments because they have no opportunity to generate the money. So, and also then the 500s are going to be, the cutoff is going to be 30. The tournaments are going to be extremely tough. And 250s is going to be opposite. For me, this is not going to work. I mean, maybe it's going to work, but for me, that's maybe not the right way.
Again, this move from the WTA was made to, quote, enhance WTA 500 events and build their value, achieved through several strategic additions and less overlap across the calendar, along with new entry rules to boost the quality of the player fields. But if that rule change wasn't enough, the tour took it a step further with this whole Pro 500 initiative by penalizing players through ranking point deductions. The top women's players are basically expected to play 21 events in a single season, 4 slams, 10 WTA 1000s, 6 WTA 500s, and the year-end championships if they qualify. Now, only 18 tournaments can be considered for a player's ranking throughout the year, and that can be increased to 19 if they reach the WTA finals. Now, if players do not compete in enough events outside of the slams or 1000s, then they risk getting 0-pointers added to their ranking. So for every WTA 500 event where a player falls short of that 6 tournament minimum or requirement, basically, they get points from another event removed from their ranking pretty much. And typically these points that are removed are from a higher level tournament like a 1000 where a player won the fewest points. This new rule change had major implications when Aryna Sabalenka unexpectedly surpassed Iga Świątek for the top spot in October. In the week of October 14th, Sabalenka trailed the pole by 69 points, but to nearly everyone's surprise, the following week Sabalenka was heralded as the new world number 1, leading Świątek by a mere 41 points. The tour did not really explain this rule at all before it actually went into effect. And I know it still might be difficult to follow despite me explaining it, but Świątek, she lost 120 points that week from her Miami Open 4th round showing, whereas Sabalenka only lost 10 points from when she lost in the second round in Dubai. The 0-pointer penalties were enforced the week of October 21st because at that point neither Świątek nor Sabalenka committed to play any more 500 tournaments in 2024. Aryna received a latter penalty because she'd competed in 4 500 tournaments in 2024, whereas Świątek played in just 2. Both Iga and Aryna faced another rankings point deduction that following week, where Świątek lost 130 points while Sabalenka dropped 65. Again, that shows you just how much the tour wants these top players to compete in these 500 tournaments. But still, despite all these rule changes, the top stars really are not lining up to compete in these 500 tournaments like the WTA probably wants them to. The ATP apparently has somewhat similar expectations in place, although they're nowhere near strict. The top players are essentially required to play at least 4 500 tournaments throughout the year, including at least one after the US Open. They also get a 0 score to represent each 500 where they fell short. But still, bottom line, the ATP has much stronger fields for its 500 tournaments compared to the WTA. The WTA held its first post-Australian Open 500 tournament in Linz, Austria, starting January 27th. Only one top 20 player competed, Karolina Muchova, who was ranked 20th in the world. The ATP had its first post-Australian Open 500 event February 3rd, a week after Linz, one in Dallas and one in Rotterdam. Dallas was kind of considered a much weaker 500 tournament compared to Rotterdam to a lot of people, but the field still featured 3 top 10 players and 5 top 20 players. Rotterdam had 4 top 10 players compete that week and 7 top 20 players overall. You would think Linz would have a somewhat strong field considering it was the sole 500 tournament that week, the biggest WTA tournament going on at the time. Now, there used to be a 500 tournament in St. Petersburg, Russia, held around this time of where Linz is now played, but it was removed due to the war in Russia and Ukraine, and Linz basically replaced it. St. Petersburg almost always had a pretty good field for the most part. Initially, I maybe thought it was because Russia maybe offered more prize money than Linz, but I think the real culprit that's hurting that post-Australian Open 500 tournament is the tour making both Doha and Dubai 1000 tournaments starting in 2024. Before 2024, one of these tournaments was a 500 tournament, which was formerly known as a Premier tournament, while the other was a 1000 tournament, formerly known as a Premier 5. And they would switch off every year, with Dubai holding 1000 and then Doha, then vice versa. So oftentimes, some of the top players would still compete in St. Petersburg, even if they went deep in Melbourne. Case in point, Caroline Wozniacki, who won the 2018 Australian Open, but played the St. Petersburg tournament the week after. Then those top players who would go ahead and play St. Petersburg would then just likely skip the Middle East 500 tournament and only play the Middle East 1000 tournament instead. But now most top players compete in both Doha and Dubai because they're both 1000 tournaments, which makes them less likely to commit to the Linz 500 or even the Abu Dhabi 500, which starts a week before Doha. Putting myself in Aryna Sabalenka's shoes, for example, there is absolutely no way I would even consider playing in Linz or Abu Dhabi because I'd already spent a whole month in Australia, so I'm ready to go home for a little bit. And then I'm expected to play back-to-back 1000s about 2 weeks after going deep in Melbourne? You can miss me with that. Then 2 weeks after Dubai, I have to do another back-to-back 1000 stretch, the Sunshine Double, which lasts 2 weeks each, so I'm on the road for even longer. Mind you, there's the 500 tournament sandwiched in that 1 week between the end of Dubai and the start of Indian Wells. This year, it was held in Merida, Mexico, which was upgraded from a 250 after the San Diego Open, which originally had this 500 slot, got canceled due to insufficient financial backing. The Merida lineup wasn't too terrible on paper this year. It had a couple of top 10 players, 4 top 20 players, but these seeds are very inconsistent. They're still really not top players, so a lot of them lost early. That gave top seed Emma Navarro a cakewalk run to the title. Navarro just played 1 top 50 player en route to the title, and her average opponent ranking was 97.5. The American double bageled 133rd ranked Emiliana Arango in the finals. Again, this is supposed to be a high-level tournament.
Oh my God. I thought this was a classy party.
The next 500 event is Charleston on green clay, which starts immediately after Miami. Having a 500 tournament right after the grueling Sunshine Double stretch is definitely not ideal, but Charleston's saving grace is that it's only a 2-hour flight from Miami. Also, women's tennis has a lot of great American talent who are more willing to play this tournament since it's in their backyard basically. Plus, it's a good opportunity still for all players really to get an early start to their clay swing. The next 500 after Charleston is Stuttgart, which arguably has one of the strongest lineups of all the 500 tournaments. The past 2 editions of Stuttgart had all the top 4 players in action, which is impressive considering immediately following Stuttgart are 2 more back-to-back 1000s, Madrid and Rome. Both these clay 1000s were extended to 12 days, making things even more taxing for the players as well. Side note, many of the top players have complained about the shift of many of these 1000s to go 2 weeks long or 12 days long, which expands the draws, but it is highly unlikely that the tours revert back to making some of these 1000 single week long tournaments again, as it gives more opportunity for lower ranked players to compete. But above all, more days means more money going into their pockets. Then there's a Strasbourg 500 tournament right after the Madrid-Rome double, and it starts the week before Roland Garros. I don't mind this tournament holding a 500 status, as it could still attract top players who want additional prep for Roland Garros that might have underperformed in Madrid and Rome. Then immediately after Roland Garros is the new Queen's 500 tournament. Absolutely no top player who went deep at Roland Garros like the semifinals or better would think of even playing this tournament. It's just too quick of a turnaround. But this is the only 500 tournament aside from Charleston that's held immediately after a slam or back-to-back 1000s that I actually accept. And it's interesting too because I kind of consider Queen's to be the grass court version of Charleston. London is a quick flight from Paris, plus it gives players good early match reps on grass ahead of Wimbledon. Then the week following Queen's is Berlin, which like Stuttgart always has the top players competing, as it's perfectly positioned to start 2 weeks before Wimbledon. Bad Homburg, another grass 500, follows the week after, which also has a good turnout as it attracts some top players who might have skipped Berlin due to wanting more recovery time post Roland Garros, or they might have some stars that just underperformed in Berlin that want more grass prep ahead of Wimbledon. This year, the DC Joint 500 tournament started just 2 weeks after Wimbledon instead of 3, which might have impacted its star power a little bit this year. Thankfully, next year, DC is going back to starting 3 weeks post Wimbledon, which could help strengthen the field a little bit more. But it might not even make a huge difference because both Canada and Cincy were extended to 12 days each starting this year, making it a difficult ask for a lot of top players to commit in competing in the nation's capital. I mean, heck, you had a lot of top stars skipping the Canadian 1000 tournament, let alone DC. The Monterey Open 500 starts right after Cincinnati and right before the US Open, so it's just a no-go for attracting the best of the best women. Not to mention, it's played at an altitude of 1,700 feet, which is not ideal prep for the US Open, which basically has no altitude. Guadalajara, which inspired this whole video, is immediately held after the US Open. This tournament calls for immediate demotion to 250 level. I'm sorry, but no top 20 players entered is a big strike one. Plus, the entry list already gives 250. I think it's truly what the tournament deserves. Again, I'm sorry. I'm just being honest. Guadalajara just is not in a great spot of the calendar for a high-level tournament. Even when Guadalajara was a 1000 tournament, the entry list didn't give 1000. It gave 500, which is probably why it was demoted to a 500 level as is now. I mean, Maria Sakkari won Guadalajara in 2023 when it was 1,000, doing so without dropping a set. I think that says a lot. Aside from how soon it starts after the US Open, Guadalajara also is just a very high altitude city with over 500 feet elevation. If I'm a top player, it really makes no sense for me to play this event if I'm trying to do well for the Asian swing where big points are on the table. Then you have Seoul, the 500, which starts a week before the Beijing 1000. Iga Swiatek was the big saving grace for Seoul this year because without her, the field wouldn't be all that impressive. It's not a surprise she breezed through to the finals, only dropping 10 games. And runner-up Ekaterina Alexandrova only had to play one top 50 player en route to making the finals, which was 49th ranked Lois Poisson. Which brings me to another point. The seeds in many of these 500 tournaments truly aren't top players. They're very inconsistent, and it's hard to bank on them going deep consistently. And this might hurt some feelings, I'm sorry, but some of these players are only ranked as high as they are due to them vulturing, for lack of a better word, these weaker 500 tournaments. Ironically enough, Daria Kasatkina is often thought to be a 500 tournament merchant. And it's ironic because Kasatkina was the one who was complaining about the WTA moving to strengthen 500 tournaments and weaken 250s, but her ranking is afloat because the 500 tournaments are kind of weak because a lot of these tournaments give 250s. And again, no shade to her, I'm just calling a spade a spade. But yeah, the Korea Open is right before the Beijing Wuhan double, so it makes sense why many top players won't compete there. Plus, it was held the same exact week as the Billie Jean King Cup finals in Shenzhen this year. And by the way, Beijing is about 12 days long, which is immediately followed by the Wuhan 1000, which thankfully is just about a week. Another 500 tournament, Ningbo, is right after the Beijing Wuhan double. The players you'd get there are the ones who just did not perform as well in Beijing and Wuhan, so the chances of getting the best of the best in Ningbo are pretty slim. I just don't think the tour truly comprehends how unrealistic it is to expect these top women to play a 500 tournament after competing in back-to-back 1000s. The entry list for Ningbo is decent now, but I guarantee you a week out we're going to see more withdrawals than a drug addict. The final 500 of the season is Tokyo, which starts the week after Ningbo. Tokyo joins Brisbane and Berlin as the only three 500s that are not held right before or right after a slam or back-to-back 1000s. Yet and still, the entry list for Tokyo was not that great last year. I think the top players are truly checked out by that point and they want to be ready and rest well for the year-end championships. And it's interesting because Zheng Qinwen, she was supposed to play in Ningbo, China, her home country. She would have probably much rather preferred to play there than in Tokyo, but she made the semifinals of Beijing and the finals of Wuhan, so it was no way that she'd be able to recover in time to play a third straight tournament in a row. But she still decided to play Tokyo because she wanted to lock in her final spot for the year-end championships, which is really the main reason why some top 10 players would play Tokyo, is to lock in that 7th or 8th spot for the year-end championships. Now, playing devil's advocate, when comparing the average ranking of the top 8 seeds for the first 14 ATP 500s and the first 14 WTA 500s this year, it's not too far off. There's not that bad of a discrepancy. Plus, the ATP has 1 or 2 weaker 500 tournaments like Rio, for example. But the ATP often hosts 2 500s in the same week, which fragments the competition even more. Yet, these joint 500 tournaments all pretty much have strong fields as they are placed in more ideal parts of the calendar, making it more attractive tournaments for the top players to compete at. What's interesting is none of the 17 WTA 500s share a week with one another. No 2-on-1s. I think it'd be a good idea to add another 500 in the weeks of the really strong ones like Stuttgart and Berlin, because those fields almost give 1000 tournament level. To me, many of the WTA 500s have served as a way for the mid-tier players to boost their rankings whenever the top players decide to rest and just sit that one out. And that might not be a bad thing for real, but I doubt that's what the WTA envisioned for its 500 tournaments, and there needs to be changes made regardless. Again, the big issue are these back-to-back 1000s. They're really killing the 500 tournaments. And it's even worse because most 1000 tournaments are longer now. And again, players have been complaining about the grueling tennis schedule for years, and it's getting worse to the point where you have Aryna Sabalenka, for example, skipping multiple 1,000 tournaments in a year. So how can you expect her to play 500s? 14 out of the 17 WTA 500 tournaments are held either right before or right after a major or back-to-back 1,000s. On the ATP, just 6 of the 16 500 tournaments are like this. First, the ATP has one less 1,000 tournament compared to the WTA, which does make a difference. Plus, the men's tour has 3 standalone 1,000 tournaments: Monte Carlo, Shanghai, and Paris, and those don't immediately precede or succeed another 1,000. Meanwhile, all 10 of the WTA 1,000 tournaments are back-to-back. They come in 5 pairs, which is ridiculous. Back-to-back, 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 back-to-back. It's unacceptable. The WTA needs to do away with at least 1 or even 2 of its standalone 1,000 tournaments if they want the 500s to have the top stars. I kind of gave a proposal to this plan if they want to again stick with this strategy of growing the 500 tournaments. First, I would demote Doha from a 1,000 to a 500 tournament. Then I would make Abu Dhabi and Qatar both 500s in the same week and make Dubai a 1,000 tournament. It's hard enough having one 1,000 in the Middle East, let alone 2. And I think by demoting one of these Middle East 1,000 tournaments, it gives the nearby 500s an actual fighting chance of having high quality top players compete. We can keep that 500 in Merida and really invest more into it and make it a grand, like the biggest tournament in Mexico. It's still going to be a bit weak, but I think it will be stronger than what it is now, and definitely much stronger than what the Guadalajara field is giving. Now, I would also demote the Linz, Monterrey, and Guadalajara 500s to 250s. I think demoting Linz to a 250 is just the right call because there does not need to be a 500 tournament right after the Australian Open, period. Even though St. Petersburg from time to time had a decent field, it's unrealistic. It's not a good spot in the calendar. I would also move that Singapore 250 to be held that same week as Linz. And then for Cluj, I would either remove it, make it a 125 because the field is pretty weak anyways, or push it back to the end of the season. More on this later. And then Monterrey, I think, would fit best right after Wimbledon. And then I would keep Guadalajara right where it is on the calendar, but again, demote it to a 250 level tournament. Then I would demote either Wuhan or Beijing and make one of those a 500 level tournament instead of a 1,000. I think you could either make Wuhan your Shanghai and make it like its big standalone tournament without the men being around, and then you would make Beijing a joint 500 with the men. Then you could also have a 500 level tournament this same week in Japan, again, like how the men do. Or you could keep that history of Beijing being the longer running 1,000 tournament in Asia and put Wuhan and Japan at those 2 500s right before Beijing. Those Wuhan and Tokyo tournaments, again, would be playing at the same time. I think the top ladies will still compete in those tournaments because they're already going to be traveling to Asia anyways for that 1,000 tournament, so they might as well play a 500 too to make it worthwhile and gain more points and meet the quota. I think this, again, has worked well in attracting basically all the top ATP men compete in either Beijing or Tokyo for years. Then I would demote Seoul to a 250 and still have it be held during this Billie Jean King Cup finals week to ensure that the top players could still play in that and wouldn't basically take away a 500 tournament from them. Then I would also demote Ningbo to a 250 level tournament. Now, I know I've been taking away some 500 tournaments, so I'm going to be giving some back on the calendar. Now, I would actually bring Ostrava back to the calendar as a 500 level tournament, and I would put it in the spot where Japan is this year. I think it might attract more top players because with it being an indoor tournament, it would be better prep for the year-end championships. Then I would make Rouen to be a 500 level tournament. Rouen is currently a 250 level tournament that is held the same week as Stuttgart. I think that it would even the playing field a little bit more and make it like less 1,000 like there in Stuttgart. Then the same thing with Berlin. I would upgrade Nottingham to a 500 level tournament to bring more top players over there and kind of fragment it a little bit more. Or they could just keep the system as it is and keep having the 500s be a good way for the somewhat lower ranked players to build their points, only for the top players to keep beating them down at the slams and the 1,000s. But if they do this, the WTA needs to get rid of the penalties or at least reduce it to 4 mandatory 500s. It's really unfair and unrealistic to expect top players to play 6 500s throughout the year in addition to 4 slams and 10 1,000 tournaments. It also just makes no sense because only 18 or 19 tournaments will even count for the ranking anyways. So that means even if I'm a top 5 player and I meet that 21 tournament quota, 2 of these tournaments will not be counted to my ranking anyway. So what's the point? So why are we having this 6 WTA 1000 tournament requirement? The requirement makes no sense. Also, the point deductions aren't a great incentivizer for these top players. Clearly, they'd rather just take the hit and focus their energy into the 1000s and the slams anyways. The rule just seems to be more of an ineffective checks and balances system. Money could also play a significant role. Instead of solely threatening its players with these 0-pointers if they don't play 6 500 tournaments a year, they could reheat the ATP's nachos and reward them with bonus prize money if they excel at these 500 tournaments. But the WTA is not in the financial standing like the ATP, which is another reason for many of these problems. The ATP reportedly generates about 4 times more revenue than that of the WTA, so that might be a motivating factor for them making these interesting changes and decisions. The tour literally said itself, one of the main pillars of the strategy includes creating a pathway towards equal prize money. They're aiming to have combined 1000s and 500s attain equal prize money by 2027 and single week WTA 1000 and 500 events by 2033. Now, I don't want to totally rag on the WTA now. Overall, it's not a terrible calendar, but the rules and expectations are what makes it honestly kind of bad. The ATP schedule is grueling too, don't get me wrong, but it also offers its players more freedom to where Alcaraz, for example, with all the tennis he's played this season, still can comfortably meet their 500 level quota and play a few money grab exos post US Open. And there are just a few really bad apples in the bunch of the WTA 1000 family, which makes the WTA's mission look not great. There are only a handful, really, of true competitive 500 tournaments where the top players consistently play at. It's the same old ones: Brisbane, Stuttgart, Berlin, or Bad Homburg. That's pretty much it. Much of those tournaments' success is based on their convenience and where they are on the calendar and how they'll set up a player for success at the bigger tournaments. And again, with how the calendar is set up right now, it is unrealistic to expect these top players to play more than 3 to 4 500s in a single season. Perhaps the easiest and best solution would be to get rid of all these rules and stipulations and let the women be. And that's including removing all the restrictions and barriers in place for the top women competing in the 250 tournaments. Tennis by nature is a non-stop sport with so many players and tournaments to account for. The tennis governing bodies also should not make the calendar with only the top players in mind. Lower ranked players deserve to eat too, and I understand the tours need to establish some law and order and put some rules in place to motivate the players to participate in some of the smaller tournaments. But the ATP has clearly found a much better balance of this compared to the WTA, allowing more freedom to its players. But again, the ATP has more financial freedom to be able to do this. The WTA faces more of an uphill battle for various reasons, and unfortunately the players will have to thug it out until the tour is in a better spot to offer more financial incentives and more freedom overall. That's all I have for this video. Let me know your thoughts on the WTA calendar overall. Do you think I'm overreacting, or does the women's tour need to seriously retool its calendar? This is a nuanced situation with other things at play that I probably did not touch on in this video, so feel free to sound off in the comments and we can have a good little discussion about the whole situation. By the way, the WTA has yet to release its 2026 calendar, so maybe there will be better changes implemented next year. Or maybe the WTA will incorporate some of the changes I recommended from this video. And if that's the case, they need to run me my money. Again, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell so you are notified whenever I post more longer form videos like this. Thank you so much for watching and for your support, and I will see you all next time here on Christian's Court.